So I decided to do a quick screen capture to be able to go through some of the basics of interacting with R and RStudio before you enter the QMRA-IV workshop. Something that I'm not going to go into is how to install R or RStudio. I'm assuming that you've installed a program at some point, so you can get through all those prompts and everything. If you are running into problems running RStudio, certain Linux installations or distributions will sometimes have problems with RStudio. And typically there's not going to be a problem on Windows or Macintosh, but if you have some kind of strange configuration file error that's coming up, I'd recommend either figuring out that troubleshooting before you arrive to QMRA-IV or working a solution similar to what I do, which is I actually just avoid RStudio. So I'm in a Linux environment, but what you'll end up noticing is that every single computer has a super key. The super key is either the command key in Macintosh or the Windows key in Windows, or either one of those for Linux, because Linux doesn't care. So open that up and you're going to get some kind of window like this, similar to what you get on Windows. And most of Mac, if you do the three finger gesture to be able to go to your Launchpad, and it's just going to show you all the programs that you have open, but you can also open up a program from in here. You can also do that if you have an older version of Windows, and you can see I can find R or RStudio here in my start menu there. So I'm just going to do super key, RStudio, open up RStudio. So I'm going to go through this first because everybody's going to probably start with RStudio as their first entree into R. It gives you a nice tidy environment where you can interact with different things. What I'm going to show you is that on the console is where you actually just get going with everything. So I'm going to make a test vector. It's going to be from 1 to 100 by a single step, if I can type that properly. And then I see it here pop up in my environment. That's one of the things people like most about RStudio. I can also do that right here in the terminal. See, all right, I have something called test, and then I can view what test is by opening up in a different window like that. So there's different ways of being able to do that. And I can also come over here to R. I can open up native R here, and I can do the same thing where it's going to be test is a sequence from 1 to 100 by a single point, and I can view that test vector here. So I can look through and I can see what it looks like. Same basic thing by way of however you're interacting with it. Where it gets different is when you're doing source coding, and that's where it becomes different between using a base installation of R versus the IDE, which is what RStudio is. So what you're seeing here is just a general console. There's no difference between this and this. So this version of RStudio with the console and this, the actual console of R, or if I open up a new terminal window, type R, and I hear basically the same thing. So all of these things are showing me exactly the same instance of the console, the terminal. What I can do is I can go to a new file and I can make a new source code. And this is going to be a sequence of 1 to 100 by 1. But I'm going to do something else. I'm going to now plot test. And if I do that and I source that code, well, I'd save it first. I'm going to overwrite this other test one that I did. And now what I can do is I can source this code by coming up here and either sourcing the actual code itself in one of the file menus or coming down into here, which is always a little bit faster, and sourcing the code, and that's what ends up happening. So I have my test value and everything like that. So I can remove all those, and I can look at the images as they pop up, and I don't have to have separate commands to be able to do that. What I would have to do here is I would have to, in the actual just terminal, is I need to make sure I know where I am first, which is everything's going to start in that location. And I can do a real quick search to see whether or not I have that test.r here, which I do. And I can source that here as well. But I can also do, real quick, I can see that I don't have anything in my environment. So if I do the same thing here, I have a test vector in my environment. But in here, I have a different instance of R, so I don't have a test vector in my environment. So now what I can do is I can source that same code, and I'm going to have this pop up as an independent plot. So everything's going to be the same, except for you can do a lot more by way of a little bit simpler debugging, by way of running just specific lines of code to be able to see whether or not it works. And it's a little bit faster to see what's in your environment as opposed to being in your terminal or native R and just looking to see what's listed in there. The other advantage quite often is the file viewer in here, where you can see whether or not I actually have this, and I can open that file as needed, or I can go to other file folders if I want to, as opposed to reading through a list of text of what's in my local directory right now and typing to see what my actual working directory is. So those are the two differences within regards to using just regular R and RStudio, because if I want to do a source code and I'm in my home directory, see if I have test R here, I would end up opening it with whatever my text editor, my code editor of choice is. I typically go with Vim or Vi, or do something like Kate as another way of doing that. So one thing that's fun about RStudio is it overrides all of your previous requests for how you open files. But I have this in here. Now, one thing that does end up happening that you may end up noticing is once source code ends up getting about 200 to 500 lines long, RStudio can be a little laggy. So you'll be typing something and it'll take a few seconds for it to actually for the letters or the numbers to appear in the editor. Some people are quite annoyed by that, me being one of them. So it's one of the reasons I go with an old school approach, which is just editing in the terminal using Vim or Vi, or using something like Kate. Um, Anything that's just a regular text editor, nothing like Word. Please don't use Microsoft Word or Pages in it's native to Macintosh. What ends up happening is a lot of the formatting ends up becoming just really relatively hard to read when you're just trying to look to see what different code are doing. So open up RStudio, open up R, interact with them however you want. That's what I would recommend before you come to QMRA-IV. Then that's going to give you an idea of the things that you're going to need a little bit more time on, the things that you are ready to hit right away, and then you can get going straight away as we progress into the course. Have safe travel. Looking forward to seeing you all there.